Hey guys, Mr. Backberg here. In this video we're going to look at rational inequalities. So looking at this first example, we are going to create a sign chart for a rational function. Now this is going to be a little bit different than creating a sign chart for a polynomial function because we've got two pieces to our fraction now. We've got that numerator and we've got that denominator. So as we're looking at this fraction, the critical values or the important values, we're going to look in two places. First thing we're going to do is look at the zeros of our function, and in order to do that we're going to take our numerator and we're going to set that equal to 0. So we're going to take the 2x plus 1, we're going to set that equal to 0. I'll have to subtract the 1 over to the other side, so I'll get 2x equals negative 1, and then I'm also going to divide the 2 over there, so I'll get x equals negative 1/2. So we've got a critical number or an important value happening at negative 1/2. But along with finding the zeros of the numerator, I'm also going to find the zeros of the denominator. These are places where our function would be undefined because our function can't have 0 on the bottom of the fraction. So I'm going to take that x squared plus 2x minus 3, and I'm going to set that equal to 0. This one is nicely factorable. This will factor into x and x. We need to multiply to negative 3, but add up to 2, so it's going to be plus 3 and minus 1. Now setting each one of those equal to 0 and solving, I'm going to get x equals negative 3 and x equals 1. So these are going to be my critical values that I set up along my number line. Now as I start creating my sign chart with the denominator, I'm actually going to look at the factored out version. I think that's going to be easier to see whether our pieces are positive or negative using that x plus 3 and that x minus 1. So starting with something to the left of negative 3, so maybe negative 4. If I plug in negative 4 across the top, I'm going to get a negative answer. If I plug negative 4 into my first factor, I'm going to get a negative answer. And if I plug negative 4 into my second factor, I'm also going to get a negative answer. Now on the bottom, if I multiply these two negatives together, negative times negative turns positive, but then I still have this extra negative on top, so negative divided by positive will give me a negative answer. So if I plugged in any value left of negative 3, my answer would always be negative. Now if I plug in something between negative 3 and negative 1/2, so maybe negative 1. If I plug in negative 1 on top, I'm going to get a negative answer. If I plug negative 1 into my first factor, that'll be positive. And if I plug negative 1 into my second factor, that'll be negative. So on bottom, positive times negative is negative, and negative divided by negative is positive. So all of those values between negative 3 and negative 1 will give me a positive answer. If I plug in something between negative 1/2 and positive 1, so maybe 0. If I plug in 0 on top, I'll get a positive answer. If I plug 0 into my first factor, I'll get a positive answer. And if I plug 0 into my second factor, I'll get a negative answer. So positive times negative on bottom gives me negative, and positive divided by negative is negative. And then if I plug in something to the right of 1, so maybe 2. If I plug in 2 on top, that'll be positive. If I plug 2 into my first factor, that'll be positive. And if I plug 2 into my second factor, that'll also be positive. And because all of these values in here are positive, my answer would be positive. So we're alternating signs here. We've started with negative values, then we had some positive values, back to negative, and then positive. So in this example, we're going to look at solving this rational inequality, but what I want you to notice is that right now our fractions have different denominators, and we're trying to do some adding with these fractions. So in order to make this work, we're going to have to get common denominators with our fractions. So as we look at what's happening in the denominators, I'm going to take this first fraction, and to work towards getting a common denominator, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by the x minus 1, which is the denominator from our other fraction. And in order to work on getting a common denominator with the second fraction, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by x plus 3, which notice is the denominator from our first fraction. Now, across the top, if I distribute this 5, then I'm going to get 5x minus 5. And on the right-hand side, if I distribute the 3, I'm going to get plus 3x plus 9. Now, on bottom, when we take this x minus 1 and this x plus 3, we could FOIL that out and multiply that together, or we could just leave those written out as separate factors. That's fine as well. So I'm going to leave it as x plus 3 times x minus 1. And this is still less than 0. Now if we go ahead and combine those like terms on top, 5x and 3x gives me 8x. And if I take the negative 5 and the positive 9 and add those together, that's going to give me plus 4. And then on bottom, we've got the x plus 3 and x minus 1. And this is still less than 0. Now there's actually a little bit of simplifying that we can do with this. If we look at that numerator, each one of those values, the 8 and the 4, are divisible by 4. So I could actually factor a 4 out of there to make it 2x plus 1 over x plus 3 and x minus 1. And then because I've got just that 0 on the right-hand side, I'm actually going to divide that 4 over to the right-hand side. So when I do that, then I'm just going to be left with 2x plus 1 over x plus 3 and x minus 1. Now notice this is the exact same fraction that we just looked at in the previous example. So we've actually already made the sign chart for this fraction. Remember, we had critical values at -3, -1/2, and at 1. On the far left-hand side, that was negative, and then we went positive, and then negative, and then positive. As we're looking at this inequality, we're looking for where it's less than 0, so that means negative. So this fraction was negative on the interval from -infinity to -3, and also on the interval from -1/2 to +1. So that's going to be the solution to this inequality. Since we were looking for where it was less than 0 on our sign chart, that meant we were looking for where it was negative. That's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching.